Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Nikki Shaver, CEO and co-founder of Legal Technology Hub and adjunct professor at Cardozo Law School, whose global perspective and journey from literature scholar to legal innovator has revolutionized how legal professionals discover technology worldwide. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm thrilled today to have Nikki Shaver on. She is the CEO and founder of Legal Tech Hub. She is an adjunct professor at Cardozo Law School. She also is the author of the Handbook for Legal Innovation, honored by Fastcase 50, as well as an ABA Women of Legal Tech honoree. And there's many, many, many more. One thing I want to note, though, on the top is she has 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's degree, a law degree, and an MBA. And
it's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, very, very, very impressive, and held many positions in knowledge management innovation way before it was cool. So with all of that, Nikki, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Sure. Well, Tom, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And hi, everyone. Thank you for listening/watching. So Tom, that was a really nice intro. And not very many people actually dig deeply enough in my educational background to recognize the number of degrees that I have. And I will just say, I think I'm an eternal student. I'm just endlessly curious. So I don't think I'm done studying. I just think that's part and parcel of who I am. I really enjoy learning. But in terms of who I am, my goodness. Well, I mean, as you said, I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of Legal Tech Hub. That's a very big part of who I am. But I'm also a mom to 2 kids. I live in Brooklyn, New York, but I'm from many different places. This is actually the 9th city I'm living in the 7th country. So I have a little bit of a different background, I think, than a lot of people working in this industry, especially in the US. And I think that gives me a slightly unusual perspective on it, maybe.
Definitely. And I think an advantageous one, because it seems like at this moment, people that are generalists in the sense of having different experiences and different knowledge of different things, they have this ability to like cross-train and get and flow easily through different, environments. And so, I think that, your background actually is a bit of a superpower right now.
That's interesting that you said that. I mean, for me, law was confining because it's so jurisdictionally bound. So you study law, you become licensed, and then you can practice in that one jurisdiction, and any additional jurisdiction you seek to add, you need to become licensed in that jurisdiction as well. And in the States, that is taking another bar. If you're moving from country to country, it often means completely requalifying, taking another, going back to law school, for example, or taking a number of exams. And so I did that once. I moved from Australia to Canada. I had studied law in Australia and practiced. That's where I practiced for about 10 years. I was a litigator. I specialized in media law and defamation. I worked in-house at media companies for a little while. Really loved it. But when I moved to Canada and had to requalify, it was very frustrating that you had to kind of put your career on hold in order to do this. And one of the things that I love about the legal tech and innovation world is you're still very much within that legal world, which I enjoy, but it's international. I think that's one of the great benefits of it. You actually can do this work anywhere in the world. And of course, you need to understand the way that law is practiced in the jurisdiction to which you move or where you're operating. But that's a relatively simple thing to do compared to actually going through the bureaucratic nature of becoming requalified. And I do think moving country to country, I grew up in Europe and I went to an international school, and I think it teaches you about adapting to different cultures, but it also teaches you about how different people perceive things. And I think that's really important when it comes to things like adoption of legal technology or of technology at all, because it makes you empathetic when you're looking at the way that people feel trying to do something new or in a new way. You can see better the perspective that they bring, or how the way that they've learned, the culture in which they're situated, even if that's a work or an organizational culture, brings specific kind of constraints to the way that they approach the adoption of new ways of working. And I do think that having that perspective can be quite helpful at the moment.
Wow, that's deep, and we can really dive into that if we wanted to. And I would like to come back to that later, but just before I move on though, do you think that is something that can be learned? It's a habit that can be expressed to get that wider view of things, or do you think that people are kind of shoehorned into where they're at, and it's really hard to change that?
I love this question, Tom. Because I think most people would assume that you have to have learned it through the experiences that you've had in your life, that if you grew up in one place, then you're much less likely to be able to develop that curiosity and kind of growth mindset and open-mindedness. But I don't think that's true at all. I think it can be learned. And there are a number of things that I remember having a great speaker at one stage in one of the firms I was working at. And she was talking about, it was actually a diversity speaker who came, and she was trying to help us understand that there were different ways of being able to understand experience. And one thing she said was, find new ways of experiencing the everyday things in your life. So an example would be, get a different perspective on the room in which you work. Stand up on a chair and look at it from that perspective. When you're on your way to work, instead of getting off at the same stop every single time, get off a stop early or a stop late and walk back and open your mind in that way. When I moved to New York, one of the things that I did was what I called my green light walks. Whenever I was able to grab half an hour in the middle of the day, I would leave the building and walk kind of aimlessly, in that I didn't really have a goal in terms of where I was going. I just let the green lights guide me. So I would go in whichever direction the stoplight was green. And that's how I explored New York, was just by walking and allowing that to dictate where I went. And it meant I saw completely new things. I kind of discovered the Diamond District without knowing where it was, just by kind of coming across those large diamonds on the street lamps at the end of it. And I think doing that sort of thing and having this ability to kind of explore and come out of yourself and make yourself see things in different ways also allows you to then understand that other people may be seeing things from different ways. So I do think you can learn it, but I also think if you are trying to learn it, you really have to bring a consciousness to that effort. It's not just accidental. You really have to think, I am going to stretch that muscle of being able to empathize with other people and step into other people's shoes. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of people who don't really want to do that necessarily.
Wow. Well, I'm loving this conversation so far. No, that's really food for thought, and the fact that it's a muscle that you can exercise and get stronger at is a great way to look at it. You also, like, with what you said, it made me think of George Costanza on Seinfeld just saying yes to everything. And
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And see where it takes you.
you never know. I also want to point out to people that are watching that, about the international stuff. Like, last time we were talking in person was in Tallinn, Estonia. And yeah, you were on a panel and you also gave your presentation, your own individual presentation. For anyone who hasn't seen Nikki present, like, just think everything she said so far, like the amount of thoughtfulness and the way that you relate things is just, I don't know, there's something about it that really, like you have a great way of communicating that it makes the complex simple to understand. And
Thank you.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed watching you at that event. But that's Future Law, by the way, in Tallinn, Estonia, happening again this year. Um, but yeah, it's a small community. We all get to see each other at different places. And so that's all great, but I do want to kind of hit rewind and go back to the beginning. I know that you have experience in a lot of different places, living in different places, learning in different places. Where did you grow up first?
I was born in the Netherlands, and I grew up there, and then in France and in Germany. And I graduated from school in Germany. And so, although that sounds like my parents were in the military, in fact, they were. My father was a scientist, and he worked for a European scientific organization. And so that's why we were in Europe. He was an astrophysicist, actually. And so it was an unusual upbringing because neither of my parents are European by birth. My mother is Australian and my father is Canadian. So it was, but I mean, I really feel that part of me is European. So I'm grateful for that upbringing.
So your father was an astrophysicist. Wow, that explains something. um, and what did your mom do?
She's a doctor. So she was a GP. And actually, interestingly, dealt with the same kinds of issues I did because she studied medicine in Australia. She did her residency in London, and then they moved to the Netherlands. And she did end up working in Germany, but in order to work there, she ended up working for the Americans on the American base in Germany because it was quite hard for her to work as a doctor in Germany because of license restrictions and language and all of that kind of thing. But yes, she was a doctor.
Wow, yeah. History kind of repeating itself with the licenses and all that
Exactly.
stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so early on, when you were growing up in these different countries, and of course, what you have in common is your parents and your family. Was there a particular like mindset or thing that you thought of that you would want to do? Like, what were the things that excited you at that age? Probably just playing outside.
When I was very little, yes, I always wanted to write, actually. So I was a voracious reader. And my childhood dream was to become an author.
Hmm. Was there a particular kind of writing that you like? Was it, mysteries or thrillers?
I loved novels. I would say literary fiction, books about people and the way that people relate to one another. I mean, it's interesting looking back, thinking about that, because I think books that are about the psychology of people relating to one another, not nonfiction, but that really interested me. Although I do remember that even when I was in middle school, at one stage, I wrote a novel. It wasn't really it wasn't a complex, long novel, but I used to write chapters and read them to my friends at recess of an ongoing story. And that was very much a fantasy story with monsters and kind of sci-fi. But no, I wanted to become a literary fiction writer. That was my dream. And so when I went off to university at first, I was studying literature, and I still love books. I mean, that's still very much a world that I adore and kind of disappear into for escapism.
If I recall correctly, I mean, your first bachelor's was in English, right?
That's right. I did my bachelor's in English literature, and at the same time, I ended up doing another one in history and psychology. And then I did my master's in literature as well. And then that's when I kind of hit this moment of, do I want to continue studying literature? And to be honest, I had reached a point. The literature that I studied was my specialty area was post-colonial literature, which is very much about talking back to center and understanding the repressive regimes of imperialism. And I loved the books that came out of that kind of world. But there was this notion as we were studying it that somehow by studying it and writing about it critically, we were doing some good for the world. There was this kind of notion that there would be a trickle down effect from the university and that it would have some impact. And I just became skeptical of that on the one hand. And on the other hand, also, although I loved studying literature, I kind of missed being able to read books for joy rather than reading them in order to break them apart line by line. So I had a place for a PhD, and I decided to pause and decide whether that's what I really wanted to do. And at that moment, I was thinking, do I want to work in business? I was interested in media, or do I want to pursue academics, continue to pursue academics? Or I had started to think that I might quite like to study law. I mean, you can see that out of post-colonialism and that kind of
Yeah.
wanting to help people, it kind of became a natural evolution.
Well, let's pause at the crossroads you just outlined because I want to explore what you just shared a little bit. So a question that naturally comes to mind is that your mom's a doctor, your dad's an astrophysicist, very like heavy science, hard science oriented. And then your focus is in English, like not that there's, I don't want to imply that there's a tension or something, but just like the fact, normally when parents are focusing in a certain way, they kind of naturally like project, what they're doing onto their kids. Did you feel at all that, you wanted to go into sciences, or how did things come about with English? Was it just, it sounds like it was just naturally your that gravity was pulling you that way on its own. But I'm just curious about that kind of intersection between those two things.
No, I think it's a very good question. I honestly, I mean, as long as I can remember, even from when I was in elementary school, I really loved to read. I do think that there was something very innate and organic there. There are pictures of me traveling. We used to travel a lot. There are pictures of me, in the heart of Africa, halfway up a tree, reading a book. Just everywhere. I used to bump into lampposts on my way to school because I would not put my book down while I was walking. I used to brush my teeth with a book propped up behind the faucets. Like, it's really was my thing. And I think my dad definitely knew that, although I'm sure he would have loved it had I embraced science. But I was never terribly good at math. Actually, that's a dramatic understatement. I was always terrible at math. I was one of those students who was really, really outstandingly good at the things that I was really interested in, and then really terrible at the things that I was not interested in, math being one of those. I liked biology, but I was never, I really knew that books were my thing. I mean, there's an early glimmer of law as well, because I did do Model United Nations and absolutely loved that. And I remember the teacher who taught that course just saying, you're like a fish in water. You just took to that so naturally. But my parents didn't force me in any particular direction. My mom actually came at medicine late. So she also was literature, history, and then came back, took the science courses she needed to at the high school level in order to go back to medical school and study medicine, which I think is amazing, because in that era, it was not necessarily the accepted thing to do, but she had a stint in publishing and TV before she did that. So I think I was very much following in her footsteps, and probably sort of genetically how I'm programmed. But I know we'll get to this later. But the funny thing is, I never would have guessed in a million years that I had an aptitude for technology. It would never have, even in the faintest recesses of my brain, occurred to me. But actually in high school and at university, a lot of my very dear friends were guys in particular who worked in computer science and built computers. And so I had that around me, but it never occurred to me that that would be a thing I would be interested in. So that, I think, is kind of funny looking back.
Wow. Did you have any early exposure to computers back then? Like,
I did to the early computers of our day at the time, but I didn't. And I used a laptop from as soon as I could in order to type and that kind of thing. But no, not really. One thing that I'm sure a lot of women, especially at the moment, can see where I'm coming from with this, but I do think it's a pity that at the time there were not the kind of STEM courses that there are now, because I think coding is actually linguistic. And had I understood that earlier, I think I might have been quite interested, because the way the way that my brain works is very logical. So that kind of linguistics plus logic, I think, would have appealed to me greatly, but I wouldn't have known that at the time, because we had zero exposure to it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think that you're right, that the horizons it opens, that you only need to have a logically oriented mind and ability to articulate yourself in order to create things in the world of, digital now.
Right, right.
And yeah, that's it's an amazing time to be alive.
It really is. Even though I know that there are concerns around where we live as well at the moment, I've been so delighted with everything that's happened with AI in the last few years. I just think it's the most interesting thing that has happened in our lifetime.
So, okay, so we came to that crossroads, right, where you have all of this education and background in the arts, and letters, where you have the degree in psychology, English, then your master's in English and literature, and possibly writing, and then you do take the next step to go to law school, right? Um, and so how that came about, and what that experience was like.
I think at the time also, it coincided with a move. So I moved from Canada, where I had finished my master's, to Australia. And I explored some of the literary offerings at universities there and felt they were a little bit conservative compared to the work I had been doing. And just the idea of law school really excited me. I really wanted to like many of us, when I approached law school, I thought, I want to do something for human rights. I really want to help people. And I saw this as a natural extension of the post-colonial specialization that I had developed. So yeah, I went to law school in Sydney, Australia, at the University of Sydney. And the way it works there, it's a 3-year course if you do it as a graduate, meaning you already have another degree. And so I was at law school with people from all different backgrounds, because it was not an undergraduate course, and it was fascinating. And I immediately from day one I just absolutely loved it. Again, the logic of making those arguments. Anyone who's probably done academic critical work in literature or history will understand, but it's quite similar. You have to build out an argument over the course of a paper in academics. And the way to do that, it really is very logical and analytical. And the way that you issue spot in law and write answers in law school was quite similar to that. Plus, being able to learn about courts law and human rights law. And I just absolutely loved it.
So, from that experience, if I recall correctly, then you go to work for a few law firms, and then you go work in house at some media firms and companies. And so, how did that come about? Like, I would take it that naturally it just seemed natural to move at a law firm after that. Was there an experience with working within traditional law firm that did or didn't work for you, that made you think of other alternatives?
I worked for a judge out of law school, and the judge I worked for convened the defamation list. And defamation, of course, is all about people's right to a reputation. And it's also about very close reading of text, which is very similar to the work that you do in literature. And so for me, that was a really beautiful combination of rights, human rights, the freedom of speech, the right to a reputation, and close reading. So I went to law firm hiring in Australia is quite different from the States, but there's one part that's similar in that you have kind of summer programs, summer associateships. And I got one at one of the top tier Australian firms. And once I had done that, I knew that I could become a graduate lawyer there. And I worked in litigation ultimately, and then was moved firms because I was hired by the preeminent media group in Australia at another firm, and that was fascinating. I got to work with the major newspaper companies and TV networks, and then actually one of those newspaper companies hired me from the firm. So a position opened up, and that seemed really like a great next step. But yes, there were some things working in a law firm that I did not love. I don't speak about that very often openly, Tom, but yes, there were, especially in Australia at the time, which was quite conservative, and gender equity had not, I think, reached that country to the same extent that it had in some other countries, including Canada, where I had come from.
Yeah. Well, this isn't the first interview where I've heard that, and it's just so unfortunate that there's so much talent out there, regardless of, you know, regardless of gender, like, and that should be no barrier or friction to everyone exploring, themselves and their talent to their utmost abilities. But certainly you have done that since then, and so after it was a series of like working in knowledge in innovation roles, knowledge management and innovation roles. And what was that, especially early on, because I think the first one was around 2015, right?
Or a little earlier than that.
Okay.
So we decided to move as a personal decision for our family. We had just had kids. We decided to move back to Canada after I'd had my second child and was still on maternity leave. And so we moved to Canada. I had to embark on this requalification program to work there. During that time, I got a contract position in a knowledge management and innovation department at a firm in Canada. And yeah, it was, from the very beginning, I was working with enterprise search systems, with, portals, intranets, and met a community of people. The Toronto KM and innovation community is extremely close-knit. And the people that I met there are still some of my closest friends. So Carla Swansberg, who is the CEO of Cleary X, was my boss. She was the head of the innovation department there. Simon Wormwell, who now is the chief strategy officer at Osler in Canada, was also someone I worked very closely with there. These people are still very close friends of mine. So I was really fortunate to fall into that. And sorry, what was your question about KM specifically, what that was? Or
I guess, like in the transition from working in the role of first a more traditional law firm and then working at media companies, what the experience of knowledge management and innovation was like, and how it was different, and how it maybe opened your eyes to, hey, this is a great fit for me.
In law firms, I think, even though I enjoyed the work I was doing, I was in some ways working against type. I remember when my class of summer associates, they did a personality test for all incoming associates to help you, understand your working style. And I literally remember the HR people stopping and turning to all of us and saying, this is a very unusual group, because we were all kind of more feelers, not, we were just a slightly different personality type. I think that really came into play. I hated timekeeping with a passion. It made me feel like my life was reduced to 6-minute units. It felt dehumanizing. It also felt silly, because my practice as a litigator was, in defamation law, you often will have many matters happening at the same time. It's not like being on one massive commercial case. So, you don't get to put 8 hours down to one matter at the end of the day. My every day was an email here, interrupted by a phone call there on another matter, back to this, need to draft that. Someone walks in the door, drops that off. You need to read that. And so trying to keep track of it all before automated timekeeping was so, so painful. And I really, really did not enjoy it at all. When I went in-house, I think I'm really pleased that I had that experience, because, of course, you are opened up to all kinds of different types of legal work. You're working with contracts, you're working with different parts of the business. That's what I loved about it, was the fact that although I had liked the people I worked with for the most part at law firms, now I was working with a legal team, but also with marketing, with sales, for me in media companies, the people that I absolutely adored were the writers, the journalists, and the reporters, and the editors. And I just absolutely loved it. That exposure and the variety of work. And when we moved to Canada, I mean, the big impetus into KM and innovation was not, I don't like legal work. It was, I have to requalify. I had to take 3 exams. It was going to take at least a year. Finding work was really difficult. And then I got this job. And you're right. I mean, what did happen really quickly is what I realized, that I don't have to work at being someone other than who I am. There was just a very natural, I can succeed in this just by being the person that I am. It was the first time that I realized I'd probably been putting some effort into playing against type, and now I didn't have to do that anymore. I was just like, my natural skills and inclination were exactly what worked in the job. I could use my psychology background. I could use, the way that I express myself and talk to people. And I found out that I had this aptitude for technology that was totally astonishing to me.
So, yeah, so you had exposure to it a little bit early on, especially through the friends that you mentioned that you had, and that they were interested in it. And I'm sure that they just had conversation after conversation about what they were working on, and that, like sharing that with you and like keeping you in the loop about that. And then obviously with knowledge management and innovation, there's some exposure to that. So I guess I'm curious to know, like, how that dovetailed back to your life. Like, where was it with the KM positions, or was there a point at which you dove even deeper into that came about? How did you explore that?
So when I was in the contract position that I got, I started going to these KM lunches, which happened every month in Toronto. And do you mean, how did I explore the technology aspect?
Yeah, did you get more involved in the technical part of it beyond?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I was fortunate, I think, in Canada, more so even than in the States, KM really is innovation. So what you're doing is quite technical. So I moved to a position where I was an assistant director, and we were working on an enterprise search system, as well as coding precedents for practice groups. And it was conditional logic that we were using. So we were using document automation. We were also, for the enterprise search, I had to do things like understand how to tweak relevancy in the system. So understand how that operated in the back end, and how the application of different tags and taxonomies would work to drive results up. And so increasingly technical. And from there, again, increasingly technical. So looking at the back end of systems and making sure that what was seen on the front end was the most effective and the most correct, or that we were tracking the right metrics and usage statistics for the lawyers. So it just was something that the more involved I became in those positions, the more of that type of work that I was doing. But at the same time, a large part of that world is driving adoption of technology and working with lawyers to translate messages coming from IT and vice versa. So a lot of what you do is, when you understand the technical language more, being able to explain that to lawyers in a way that makes them understand it, but also explaining legal concepts to IT technicians in a way that allows for things to be built out in certain ways. Also identifying problems and pain points that the lawyers had, and translating that into improved processes that could solve those problems, or going out to market and looking for new technologies. So all of that is really part and parcel of KM and innovation. And it's a fascinating role, I think, especially as someone who's been a lawyer, because you have this central role in ensuring that lawyers are going to practice better and get more satisfaction from the work that they do as well.
It's interesting that in kind of laying the foundation of your origin story and like the different influences that you had and have, that how everything is just fitting together to make it where you're like extremely well positioned to do exactly that. And also, like, I think this is a perfect place to kind of segue to Legal Tech Hub, because being that translator, as
Mhm.
pointed out, between two different worlds, between
Right.
the technical on the tech side and the technical kind of on the legal side, and knowing how to approach each audience. Um, it, this will be the 5th year, right, for Legal Tech Hub?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
And for those that might not be familiar with it, if you could tell us what Legal Tech Hub is, what its mission is, and just to add a little bit of context to that for us.
Sure. So Legal Tech Hub started out as a global directory of legal technology solutions. It was when I was at Paul Hastings leading innovation at Paul Hastings. One of the things that we had to commonly do, just as I had previously in other roles, is go out to market and look for technology solutions. But there was nowhere that you could go to do that in a way that allowed you to find it easily. Like, I didn't want to go to Google and just search for document automation. I needed a document automation of a particular type that was geared specifically to lawyers, with this type of interface that operated in these languages for these types of lawyers and these practice groups. And there was absolutely no way of searching for that, filtering for it, finding it. And, that was on-prem, all of these different characteristics. So when we first built Legal Tech Hub, it really was for the purpose of providing that almost enterprise search-like, knowledge management driven interface into the world of legal technology globally, because I was very intent on making sure this was international and accessible to lawyers all over the world and innovators all over the world. Because one of the issues about, for example, being in the Baltics, I met a Lithuanian firm. They serve clients in 5 different languages. For them, going to Google was completely unhelpful. None of the technical, the vendor websites actually stated in which languages their solutions operated. So this allows you to filter by all of those characteristics and attributes. Then we were joined by Jeroen Plink, who is my business partner and co-founder. Jeroen comes from a background of he was the CEO of Practical Law in the US before selling it to Thomson Reuters. Even before that, he had founded a legal technology company. He also is a lawyer and has worked in law firms and innovation, but he has a large amount of experience on the vendor side, which was very complementary. And I had always wanted to build up Legal Tech Hub to have content on it. And we launched our subscription platform in 2023. So Legal Tech Hub is now the preeminent source for market data and information on legal technology, including the most comprehensive directory of global legal tech, but also market reports and analysis and tools and resources to help you go out and evaluate the market sensibly, make the best buying decisions possible, make sure that you're making the best investments on behalf of your firm or legal department, and even move towards implementation and piloting. And we have a publishing site where we publish every day articles about the industry and what different events in the market mean for people and for lawyers, so that lawyers themselves can get up to speed on legal tech and the technology that's really impacting their practice at large. In addition to that, we also do advisory work. So we advise law firms, legal departments, legal tech companies, all the way from early stage pre-launch startups to very mature companies in the industry, and also private equity firms. And we run events that kind of extend our educational mission and build a community around what we do.
Wow, that is a huge mandate. Um,
It is
I mean, starting
really all
off with
about education.
yeah, I mean, starting off with what I think was like essentially like a buyer's guide, right? Like the actionable information that is necessary to understand what a product does, how you could fit it into your workflow, and that kind of information that you would look for when
Right.
you were working at a law firm. And you've worked with many top tier law firms, Fortune 500 companies, and I think the work that you're doing right now is just so far reaching and amazing, bringing people together. Um, and speaking of which, we just celebrated International Women's Day, and I'd like to point out, it shouldn't be something to point out, but it's actually really cool that you have so many talented women that are working at the company, right?
Yes, we have amazing women. Stephanie Wilkins, our director of content. We have Cheryl Wilson Griffin, our VP of vendor advisory. We have Sarah Glassmeyer, who's our director of data curation. We have Deb Tesser, who is our executive director. I mean, it really is just we have an amazing group of women who work with us, and I feel very proud and just delighted, honestly, to work with them every day. It's a joy. And I must say, I mean, everyone in the company is a joy, but you're right. In light of International Women's Day, yeah, I'd like to highlight them.
Yeah, heavy hitters there, the very talented people, and that must be very cool to get to work with them every day.
It is. Yeah, it's great.
I love watching, following your posts on LinkedIn about the different issues that come up with the whole AI discussion because it has been, quite overwhelming. It seems like almost every day there's and even multiple times a day, there's some new launch or new functionality that's unlocked. Um, we don't have enough time to get into everything in detail, but I mean, one thing that's obvious, it's here to stay, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you saw, Tom, we just launched our market map of generative AI products, and there were 400 products on our market map. When we first started putting it together, which was in July last year, just gathering the data, there were 151. So that shows the growth just in generative AI and legal tech. And I really believe that if we do it, we'll be launching this in on regular intervals. I think in a year from now, we'll see 1,000. That's my genuine guess. Maybe that's slightly overstating it, but it's not going anywhere. No.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, there was maybe it was you, but quoted about investment in AI generally, and that's something like 3 out of the 9 within the past year that raised over 10 million, was it? Were legal technology companies,
Yeah.
which is just a bit crazy. And actually, I think the figure was 100 million. Yeah,
Yeah,
over.
I mean, of the biggest raises in legal tech since ChatGPT launched, something like 5 of them have already happened this year, which is it's that is because if you look at the way that legal tech investment is trending, the size of the raises is going up. Not just every now and then there's a spike, but on average, what we're seeing is bigger raises. And that's been the case since ChatGPT launched and the generative AI hype hit legal tech. But it's interesting to me that that is still the case. And in fact, it's the case even more so now. And there are a lot of people who are saying this is a bubble. I think there's some of that. I don't think this level of investment is sustainable. And I think we're going to see some companies crash and burn. But it also says something about where we are in the industry at the moment because it's so different from where we came. And I think one thing that's been really notable, the raises, but also where they come from. So if you look at the investors that are active in the industry now, it's very big name Silicon Valley investors who just a few years ago would not have touched legal tech. And now they're playing in this. Also, if you look at some of the companies in legal tech that are doing well and getting these big raises, they're being recognized in ways that legal tech companies never have been before. So Harvey, for example, was recognized as one of Fortune 50's 50 top AI companies alongside Microsoft, Meta, Anthropic, OpenAI. That's never happened in legal tech before. It's a very unusual, exciting period, I think, in our industry.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely raised the profile of legal technology beyond where we were
Yeah.
2 years ago.
How do you feel? I mean, you have one of these AI companies in the market.
Mine is definitely in a different league.
Yeah, but you've seen it move, right? Because you have had an existing company, and now you're one of the generative AI players. That must be an interesting transition to be a part of.
It is, and I definitely welcome everyone to it because I think that we all help to educate the market about what this all can do for the betterment of ourselves as professionals, but also the public.
Right.
And many hands makes light work. So I think it's fantastic. I think it's a fantastic time, and there's more coming on board, and I think that we have a lot to learn from each other. There's a couple of things that I'll ask you about, kind of like within this world. One is, when I've looked at different offerings that people have, there's this kind of dichotomy between companies that are, well, most companies are building a faster horse versus something that's more transformative in how things will actually be, because the efficiency gains and all that people tout, that's leading somewhere. That's leading to like a structural change where there has to be, not sure exactly how it's going to look, but has to be some kind of re-envisioning of how we do what we do. I'm just curious how you see that, and if you've seen, like, have you seen any companies that are approaching it from like a transformational standpoint, or is it mostly the former?
I think it's mostly the former still. And I think that's where we have yet to see the true potential impact of this technology. The trouble is it requires imagination and intent to work in really completely new ways. Some of the things I think are interesting, I was breaking down the data in this market map and where we're seeing most of the concentration of generative AI companies in terms of categories of legal tech, what use cases they address. And I think some of the areas where we're seeing a very high volume of this type of company is areas that really focus in on productivity gains, as you said. They're really about incremental improvements, being able to do things more efficiently. I think that's the easier way to build this technology at the moment. I think some of the more interesting ones are addressing problems that are critical problems at law firms or legal departments that actually previously were not possible to solve with technology. So that's exciting. I think things that actually could not previously be done, now they can be done. So they're solving new problems. And that's a new way of working, but they're in little pockets. These are little niche things. They're not massive things. I'll give you an example. The circle up process in securities and capital markets. So when you're reviewing a prospectus and you have to go through the draft prospectus and circle any of the numbers that are relevant to specific aspects of the deal where you need some comfort. You need the auditor to come in and verify it next to the financials and say, yes, this is correct. And there's a comfort letter that is written that kind of verifies all that and says it all checks out, basically. It's usually an associate's job to go through the prospectus and literally by hand circle any of the numbers that require auditing in that way. But because some of the numbers are written numerically and others are written alphabetically, you have not been able to in the past easily use something like a Control F or anything. You literally had to read every single page. That's ridiculous. So that now obviously can be automated. Or other parts of legal workflows, like even something which has now become so prolific, we maybe have forgotten that this was not possible 2.5 years ago, which is to compare an incoming contract to an entire playbook and immediately instantaneously get a red line of your organization's rules on this contract so that you can see exactly what needs to change, what needs to be negotiated to bring it in line with the way that your company operates. That's pretty phenomenal. But I think the areas where we're going to see much more actual transformative tech is in the nexus between law firms and their clients. So we're starting to see tools that are building out to actually transform the way legal services are delivered, that sit between the two, that bring productivity to both, but also then change the way that they interact and the way that they work in a really profound way. I think that's more likely to be where we're going to see that kind of reimagining of legal work. And I also think on the legal department side, we're going to see it, but we're a ways off because they don't have budgets. A lot of the time, the full AI initiative is not driven by the legal departments. It's driven by the business at large. And they don't have the resources necessarily to really reimagine things the way that we're talking about.
Absolutely. So with the time we have left, I do want to ask you and get to a couple of questions that I ask all of my guests. The first one is just, from like helping everyone to maybe take away something that they can help themselves with, which is, all of us are close to being type A's and we do so much and you have so many things that you juggle. Maybe what's one thing that you would recommend as a way that you keep all of that balanced? Like what is something that you would recommend to people as a way to be able to do more with less?
You know what? I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't think I have balance in my life right now in that respect. I really don't. I wish that I had better balance at the moment. The best thing I can recommend is getting outside and taking a walk and breathing fresh air. But the reality is I do not do that enough myself. So I feel somewhat hypocritical saying it. But I for me, that is the key is if you can walk, if you can get exercise, if you can get FaceTime with the people who you love. I guess the thing that I do, which is maybe not necessarily what everyone would choose, but for me, traveling is a huge thing. Like when we were in Estonia together, we were there for a conference and it was work. But then being able to take a morning and walk around Tallinn and see the city and the history there, that takes you outside of yourself. And that to me is the way that I really am able to kind of let go. And it's also when I have my most creative ideas, because I think people forget that when we are so busy that it's a deadener on creativity. And you need creativity, I think, to do this kind of problem solving work well. So yeah, taking a break, whatever that means to you. For me, that means getting out of my usual environment and traveling somewhere.
That's really great. The other question I have is, and you kind of hinted at it, but at the end of the day, when all of us are doing this crazy amount of work and hopefully getting a break from it every once in a while, what makes it worthwhile for you? Like, what is the thing that at the end of the day, with these different efforts that you're making, give you that feeling of satisfaction?
Purpose.
Yeah.
I really am very purpose driven, and that's always been the thing that I seek from work more so than financial gain. And I think being part of the legal tech community makes me feel as though I'm part of making law better for everyone. And so something that I want to do more of in the future is work with solutions that really help with the access to justice problem, because I think that's where generative AI in law has the potential to really transform in the most positive way that we could imagine. But at the moment, of course, far more effort is being put in at the commercial end of the spectrum. But yeah, for me, it's very much purpose. And also, I will say, providing a positive view to my children of what work can be. I think they see how lit up I am by what I do, how much I love it, how much I enjoy the people in my life because of work. And they think it's cool that I run a business, and my daughter thinks it's cool that, that her mom is able to do this kind of thing. And I love that being able to give her that feeling that she can do anything. That's important to me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate those words of wisdom, and I'm sure everyone else does. And I want to thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being on my show, Nikki.
Tom, thank you so much for having me. You are such a gracious host. I've really enjoyed it.
And for everyone that's tuning in, if you can share with them how they can keep in touch with you.
Of course. You can find Legal Tech Hub at just legaltechnologyhub.com. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I am very open to people just DMing me. I like to meet new people. That's the easiest way.
Perfect. And to everyone, thank you so much for attending. See you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.